Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Nazarik was in high school DxD? Russian Reversal wrote this amazing story. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Mamanga lightly made his way out of the principal's office before turning to Mickey, who was following behind him, smiling slightly. A smile that Mamanga returned, glad to have a chance at furthering his education, even if it had almost hit a snag in his meeting with the headmaster. Thank you for your help, Mickey. Mom. Mamanga wasn't sure exactly why Mickey had suggested for him to call her mother, especially when they haven't known each other for long, familial relations or not. But it might have been a quite common occurrence. And judging by her not asking more about his emancipation, especially since he didn't have a good idea of what that was himself, it was easier for him to refer to Mickey as mother. Something which also added a layer of plausibility to his identity. If he lived with his mother, he was less suspicious, especially as a young man who had not yet reached adulthood. True, the very thought of addressing Mickey as mother was strange to him, but he would soldier on. The last time he had seen his mother was decades ago, when he found her dead in the kitchen trying to make his favorite dish. It was probably the worst day of Mamanga's entire life, perhaps even worse than the end of Yggdrasil, despite the recentness of the latter. But time had passed and old wounds were scabbed over. And with her body long ago being turned in for processing at the fertilizer aggregators, there were no more things that triggered any memories of her passing. So, Mamanga pretty much stopped thinking about it years later, remembering what had happened only occasionally on the anniversary of her death. When the developers of Yggdrasil announced the end of service, on the days leading to it, Mamanga often remembered and drew parallels to it with the death of his mother. Perhaps trying to reassure himself that even such great past wounds became less painful as time passes and would be forgotten in time, so he would survive even the end of Yggdrasil. And so, as a result, he had long since stopped being sad about his mother's death, simply accepting what had happened as the harsh truth of life, so he felt no sadness in calling Mickey mother. Still, the very act of referring to her in that way felt strange, unfamiliar, and frankly unexpected to Mamanga. After all, she was close to his real age. However, Mamanga could easily suppress his thoughts on the subject with the thought that he was doing it to avoid drawing attention to himself as he walked Mickey out of school, watching the minutes pass before his classes started. I didn't even bring a computer with me. How would I take the class? Or will they give me a school one? How exactly schooling worked in Japan in the past? Mamanga thought for a moment, but judging by the fact that the principal hadn't mentioned it, then it was likely that the school would provide his study material. If worst comes to worst, Mamanga would have no trouble creating them with Create Greater item. Though Mamanga hadn't checked to see if he could create a complete computer or complex electronics at all using his abilities alone. Okay, I'll walk Mickey to the gate and maybe I can check it before class starts. Escorting Mickey to the gate, Mamanga bowed slightly as he said his goodbyes. Thank you again for your help. You're welcome, Satoru. Mickey smiled back warmly at him before turning around and making her way back home. Mamanga, on the other hand, activated Life Essence and Mana Essence. From the looks of it, for Mickey, every single bite she ate was considered a separate dish, so now the effects of food are starting to disappear and weaken, one by one. Interesting observation, I should write it down somewhere. Maybe I should start creating a sort of experiment journal? I'm sure it'll be useful in familiarizing Nazarik as to the differences between this world and Yggdrasil. Another thing to add to the ever-growing and growing list of concerns. After a moment of watching Mickey's disappearing form, Mamanga turned away, then quickly walked to his class, leaving Mickey to make her way home alone. Walking since she didn't have a driver's license. Pandora's actor, no Issei Hayadu, he didn't want to become sloppy because of his happiness having father near him, made his way to his class exactly as he normally would. All the while, he kept a grim and sour smile on his expression and responded languidly to attempts to cheer him up from his friends. Issei was perfectly maintaining the mask of the man who had just survived an awful date and a betrayal by his father. An expression that let the world know that something extremely sad and unfortunate had happened in his life. Issei's act was so perfect that it even caused Ika Kiryu, an old acquaintance of Issei since elementary school who never missed an opportunity to vent a sarcasm or mock him, to retreat, allowing him to mope himself in peace. Issei would love to dive deeper into Ika's psyche to know more about Issei, but found that he was too disappointed by her to bother. Of course, he still did it, his orders were absolute no matter what he felt about it. There's nothing special about Ika Kiryu, she's as directionless as the rest of her peers. Issei sighed inwardly a little. Although meeting Kiba Yudo has stirred my feelings as an actor and my instincts as a collector too much, it would be too stupid to assume that everyone I meet on my path will be as unique as this Ostelungstustuk. Father bestows rewards, but only on those who can take it themselves. Wonderful delicacies are hidden at this banquet among the tasteless dishes of third-rate cooks. Father has given me a purpose. In my service I need to get information about my entire surroundings. Now I am a restaurant critic, and even if the offered dishes taste like dust, I will do my father's will and deliver every minute detail of the dish. Pandora's actor? Just as he reiterated his loyalty to his father, Issei instantly felt the connection of a message from father formed between him. Yes, father? Issei spoke softly as he leaned forward, crossing his arms in front of him to conceal the movement of his lips, yet speaking softly to minimize the chance of eavesdropping. He was now looking as if he were scowling at something under his nose, a fitting picture for someone who had looked so sad a little earlier. I ran into the headmaster of this school. He has magical powers and possessed several artifacts that might not be made by him, precluding the existence of another. And by all appearances, he knows I am no ordinary person. He has probably already passed on information about me to the others aware of the magical world he knows. Father replied bluntly, getting right to the point. The artifacts he possessed allowed him to ignore low-rank illusions, and possibly see the true form of doppelgangers, though whether he can see through the abilities of a greater doppelganger is still unknown. Plus he can summon backup. If someone stronger shows up, be prepared for a fighting retreat. If the enemy turns out to be too strong, retreating with as much information as possible is priority. If you think you are being lured into a trap, retreat. Any information you might gather by springing it is useless if you can't pass it on. Until such a possibility occurs, act naturally and try to gather information without giving yourself away, but don't take any unnecessary risks. If you were to be near the director for whatever, use your special abilities to conceal your nature, but do not transform without a plan. You are Nazarik's trump card. To use you without a plan is dangerous and pointless. If you discover any strong adversary, let me know immediately. As you command, father. Issei nodded slightly, simultaneously suppressing his desire to bow completely and yet incapable of not showing respect to his creator in any way, even if he was incapable of seeing him when using message. After a moment, the connection between Issei and Momonga disappeared again, and Issei breathed out a slightly picturesque exhale, as if he had just finished a sad and inaudible monologue. Thinking out loud some thought, confusing the potential observer, then slowly leaned his head back with his hands in front of him, showing his defeated posture. Issei's mind, however, was working at full strength, his current target for observation being the director. There's some problem, however. If he was to observe through walls without seeing the target or looking into their eyes, without communicating or using his special skills, he could only penetrate the minds of extremely weak beings, level 30th and below. And that was if they had no resistance to mental influences, so there was a good chance that he could not penetrate the director's mind. What was especially dangerous, however, was that it's possible, in the attempt to invade his mind, Issei's action could be detected by the headmaster himself, so Issei froze in indecision. If he could have approached the headmaster and could see him, then Issei would have planned much more confidently. However, his order was also very clear, to stay away from the headmaster and not draw attention to himself. On the other hand, Father also said about the need to gather information without risking himself in vain. Issei was at a loss. He wanted to receive more information from Father, to clarify his orders, to prevent a single blunder in his work, and not to fail in a single verse of his song. And yet, at the same time, all this was a test of the Issei himself, on how he would be able to act appropriately to carry out his plans. Issei frowned before still taking his chances, preparing to flee a moment later if he was discovered. Overconfidence might be a slow and insidious killer, but underconfidence might even kill you even quicker, or worse, disappoint Father. Mirror of thought. Inaudible to anyone listening, furthermore turning sideways, looking out the window, Issei used his strongest of mind-reading abilities, then further amplified it and cast spells to conceal his potential interference with another being's mind. The look from within, silence in the looking glass. A moment later, Issei's mind reached out to the headmaster's mind, with careful light touches testing the latter's mind defenses. It was hard to tell if something had been originally applied to the headmaster's mind, since he had acted calmly even before Issei's actions and did not react when he did start. Of course, it's very possible that it's all a trap, but jumping the gun is unwise as well. So far so good. However, I should be wary, creatures of this world may have strange abilities that interfere with my observation or even be able to notice my actions easily. So, carefully but quickly Issei began to retrieve the memories of the headmaster, Johann, starting with the most recent ones, since father had only met him a dozen minutes ago. So, Zeoticus Gremrys contracted Mage, the younger sisters of the two Satans. And they decided? Really? Of course they will provide insurance and protection. But even so, validation? Makes sense, but the risk. A potential enemy would not kill them so easily but try to take them alive, and they are sure they could prevent that. Johann growing up, resentment, eager to prove himself, prone to confrontation, all useful stuff to know. And regarding his powers, Johann, he's level 30th? Within those limits, plus or minus 5 levels, judging abilities in the new world and only by their memories and thoughts is extremely difficult. Note for the future, humans are an unreliable source of information. Confident that his intrusion has not been detected yet, or if he had, then he needed to get more pertinent information quicker. Issei began focusing on his older memories. Going a bit deeper now, a little more orderly chaos but still empty meaninglessness, bereft of purpose. Oh, there's another babysitter for the sisters, a demon, one that's a little higher level than Johann, but they can't interfere. Agrippa, stronger than Johann, but I would not call him strong. Finally, the Mao, Surzex Lucifer. From the rumors Johann has heard but not seen firsthand, the owner of a really impressive power, at least above the 80th level. But Johann has never observed him personally, so the estimate may differ greatly in either direction by dozens of levels. Perhaps even to the 100th level? Potential danger. I need to warn father. The sharp sound of bells brought Issei back to the tangible world, informing him that classes had begun, and he quickly left Johann's mind and rose with all the students, as their routine greeting began. It is necessary to deliver information about certain things to father, but it is not urgent at the moment. Instead of apprehension, the poor fools had decided to choose pompous hubris as their response, a desire to turn father's appearance into their own luck. Issei had to fight his instinctive desire to destroy all these ants to dare to presume to use father, but he successfully controlled himself. Assuring himself that it's all a part of father's plan, he just has to play his role and all would be right. These fools see the danger he represented, the barest hint of the iceberg they've seen, as a test for Rius Gremory and Sona Citri. All the while, not even realizing that they are only writing their own lines in his great play. Truly, father, how far does your plan extend? Having some kind of plan at this point would be nice. Momonga sighed as his thoughts turned maudlin, before rising from his seat after the bell sounded. The memories he got from Issei informing him what he needed to do. Unfortunately, the school didn't provide him with a computer. Although he noticed that those existed in this world, albeit so ancient and primitive that they would have been of value only as antiques in his past world. But, having roughly understood the principle of operating them, Momonga was willing to try his hand at working with them. However, the problem was that apparently none of the students were assigned a computer. They all used paper instead. And they had to use expensive ink to write on them, wasting both the ink and the paper. You had computers, why didn't you use them and write on paper instead? Fortunately for Momonga himself, he was provided the textbooks and notebooks of this world, along with a suitable single-seat desk and writing utensils, something that he was grateful for. He doesn't really have the legal tender to buy the expensive school supplies. How rich must the school be to provide such rare resources to every student for free? Momonga has to admit, it's weird to hold on to a pen for the first time. Although writing with a stationery was not unusual for Momonga, after the widespread use of technology in his past world making tablets and stylus the preferred way of writing, he never actually ever held a pen in his life. Even in Yggdrasil, magic and special abilities existed that could transfer entire text in a flash. He could still write Japanese, though not very confidently, quickly or beautifully. By the end, however, he did figure out both how to write his name, and after introducing himself to the class, received some initially interested looks from the other students. Something which was quickly replaced by disappointed and even disgusted ones when he mentioned that he was Issei Hayadu's older brother. Issei, it's my fault you accidentally died, I admit and apologize. But stop destroying my reputation from the afterlife. Only his undead nature was able to suppress his desire to fix his reputation and use some kind of spell like Wish Upon a Star to change all people's memories of Issei. Other than that car wreck of a first introduction, lessons proved uninteresting for Momonga, at least the first lessons, that is. Not because he's a natural genius or anything like that, nor because he was well educated, his only elementary school level education proves that. Rather, he never had a problem with the Japanese language in the first place, given that he was an adult who knew it well. Even if he had to refresh some of the grammar rules he'd managed to forget. He'd even managed to learn some that he didn't know. He knew math because he had studied Yggdrasil formulas, he remembered biology roughly because of his study of the world of Yggdrasil itself, even if he had to make extra marks in his recollections concerning magical creatures. Literature, history, and chemistry, however, were another matter entirely. He was poorly taught in those subjects. In fact, he lacked formal education in those subjects entirely. He could recall scattered memories in the past from his friends from Ains Ogown mentioning bits and bobs about the subject, but no more than that. He had managed to deflect suspicion for a couple of times during class, using the years as a salaryman to avoid attention and to get extra work instead of answering a question. But in the end, he mostly just stared blankly at his textbook and whatever it is the teacher wrote on the board, hoping that his teachers would perceive his gaze as understanding the subject. Finally, however, when the school bell rang and the students began to gather for their big break, chatting among themselves about inane things and about where to settle down for lunch, Momonga ran into a problem. Momonga didn't need to eat, strictly speaking. Though he could do so thanks to his new body, food did give him buffs, but the concern was that Momonga didn't have the kind of money that people of this Japan used. Without money, he couldn't buy himself a proper lunch, and judging by the way all the surrounding students acted, not eating lunch would be taken as something strange, something that might even attract attention. No, of course he could use the food in his inventory, but as far as he could tell from Mickey's reaction, that kind of food was unusual in this world, even the low-leveled item. Momonga frowned as he pondered this conundrum. Should he risk not eating anything? After all, it wouldn't be strange if he missed one meal, would it? Maybe it was a little strange, but if he brought lunch tomorrow, maybe the watchers could just let today's mistake by Momonga pass them by, dismissing it as mere coincidence? A slight exclamation from the people who had not yet left the classroom caused Momonga to scramble out of his musings, chiding himself for losing focus. Thankfully, he did not make any sudden movements that would attract attention, as the idle chatter suddenly turned into insistent whispers. So, instead, he shifted his gaze first to the window, concentrating on its reflective surface, checking to see who was standing behind him at the moment and listening a little more closely to his surroundings' voices. In the reflection of the glass, Momonga saw two girls in school uniforms with very noticeable features. One has long red hair running freely down almost to her knees, the hair covering her very provocative school uniform, whose skirt was obviously specially shortened. Most notably, however, were her volume of breasts that seemed more dangerous to her back than seductive. Momonga certainly preferred big breasts to small ones, so it was impossible to say that he didn't like what he saw, but, what am I thinking? Maybe they're coming to attack me right now. Get your head back in the game, Momonga. Momonga shifted his gaze to the second girl who entered following the first, walking half a step behind the red-haired girl. But their appearance doesn't help me concentrate on this possibility at all. What a scary ability to distract me so completely. The second entrant was slightly shorter than the first, with black hair gathered into a high, thin ponytail that came down almost to the girl's heels. Momonga wondered how she styled her hair that it wouldn't drag on the floor. The other girl was dressed in the same clothes as the first entrant, and with breasts that seemed even larger than the first girl's. Given her barely realistic breast volume and the length of her hair, Momonga wondered for a second if this girl was a created NPC like the denizens of Nazarik. They definitely were eye-catching enough to merit such a possibility. Before Momonga could think about this possibility further, however, his new sense that he pegged as his magic radar noted that the two girls possessed magical abilities. So, slowly, without making any sudden movements, he slowly turned his gaze to them. They're here? Don't tell me they know? And it's Issei's brother. Of course he is, and yet he seems so decent. With each of his classmates' silent conversation he overheard, Momonga felt his dignity crumble under the iron boot of indifferent public opinion, making him even consider going back to Nazarik for a moment. To think, in Nazarik he was choked with endless admiration from the NPCs, but as soon as he was in the opposite situation, he instantly preferred undeserved admiration to undeserved censure. They activated his emotion suppression almost equally. Issei, why couldn't you just be a regular schoolboy? Momonga's overwrought emotions dissipated a moment later, exactly as the breezy couple stopped in front of his desk. Hello, the red-haired girl smiled at Momonga before extending her hand for a handshake. My name is Rias Gremory, and behind me is Akino Himejima. A pleasure. Momonga responded to Ria's handshake in kind, still inwardly wary of her actions and reactions as he also watched Akino behind her. Thankfully she wasn't moving to box him in. She was keeping a calm and even good-natured smile, slightly raised one hand and waved at him slightly without saying anything. Satoru Suzuki. It's nice to meet you, Satoru. Rias glanced at him with a smile before letting go of his hand. I must admit, it's very unusual to meet a newcomer who transferred after the beginning of the school year. I hope you'll forgive this mild curiosity. You're not busy right now, are you? No. Momonga was even glad for the chance that he could not procure lunch without attracting suspicion. But at the same time he reminded himself that depending on where the two girls were taking him now, he might be in for a fight. If you wanted to talk about something, I would be happy to answer your questions. After another moment, Momonga sensed an attempt to use magic, but not directed against him, but against the people around him. Gradually, Momonga could easily hear their whispers begin to subside and people began to return to their normal activities. An illusion? Or some kind of mind effect? Silent magic. Life essence. Silent magic. Mana essence. Momonga silently cast his spells, glancing at the data revealed. His findings made him relax a bit. Unless they use something like false data, life, and false data, mana beforehand, what's shown should be how strong they truly are. I'd say the red one, Rias, is close to a level 40 mage while Aquino is much weaker, about 20th. They are both completely no danger for me, but it's really like Negrito said, meeting a level 40 being in this world is not that rare. After all, what are the chances of me finding two in a school I just randomly enrolled in? As Momonga slowly started to stand up, he once again assessed his situation. The difference between Rias and Aquino may seem enormous, but they are much closer in power level than level 99 and level 100. The only question remains, are they the director's spies or his soldiers? Then I guess we can take a little walk. You don't mind, right, Satoru? This is not exactly the best place to have a chat. Rias smiled calmly, then started to walk away, clearly expecting Momonga to follow behind her, with Aquino herself showing a good bit of professional training, lagging behind Rias. The position as they moved, maintained so that Momonga himself would be on an angle between the two of them. Basic PK trick, one leads, the other watches from the side. Momonga easily rose from his seat, standing and then walking between the two girls. In case of danger, I have to deal with them instantly and simultaneously. Then, remembering the ability of the previously slain red dragon, and the fact that his goal of all life is death, was still on recharge and was only supposed to recover in 3 full days, Momonga tensed a little internally. Assuming that these girls do not possess any of the strange abilities of this world, that would counter me. A level 1 like Issei did carry a world-class item after all, so I need to keep on my toes. Rias silently made her way to the exit of the classroom, opening the door before stepping forward, Momonga following closely behind, which had almost made him nearly bump into a tall and stout man in gilded purple armor, with a stern expression on his slightly unshaven face, who had taken a step back. Momonga's gaze lingered for a moment before realizing that the figure in front of him was shrouded in a light haze, as if the figure itself were translucent. It was a clear sign of the use of magical invisibility that was countered by Momonga's arcane sight. Something wrong? Aquino spoke for the first time, asking from the side from Momonga, and he had to slow his responses before he could cast a spell. Momonga on the other hand only smiled inwardly, not planning to reveal his cards so early and so easily, inwardly beginning to prepare for a possible fight. Another level 40, but this one appears to be more of a magic knight, judging by his armor. A rather astute act if Rias was leading me to an ambush, having an invisible backup. And all? I see another one. This one appears to be a mage, but judging by how far he's on the corridor, he fights from a long distance rather than a middle distance. Ranged attacks or summoner? No, nothing. Momonga swept his gaze lightly over the black-haired figure of the frozen demon in front of him, as he counted the invisible figures around him. He moved his eyes surreptitiously so as to not give out the fact that the ambushers were not so hidden after all. And that makes 8 or 6 if you exclude the 2 girls in front of me. It's hard to judge levels using only basic indicators like HP and mana, but I would say their levels are in the 30th or higher, the strongest being apparently the 45-leveled mage. Garbage in combat, but still enough for me to be on guard. Who knows what these strange people around here will throw out? Who knows what this strange man will pull? Aquino watched the unknown young man who had introduced himself as Satoru Suzuki closely, trying to move at some distance, so that she was not leading him in a kind of convoy, but simply moving slightly behind Rias. Slightly behind her king, that is. The news of an unknown person appearing at Koa's academy had reached Rias Gremory from her father within minutes of his first entrance to the headmaster's office, after which Rias had to argue with Zeoticus a great deal. First, demanding that he promise not to send Gremory's fighting forces directly into the academy, fearing both diplomatic incidents and the fact that in the end, there might easily be nothing of the academy left. The fighting would also almost certainly disrupt the normal work and rhythm of Koa's life. By the end of the day, though, Aquino had no doubt that Zeoticus had sent his personal bodyguards or some other elite group of demons anyway. After all, while she couldn't see any, she had a feeling as if someone powerful was near her, even if she couldn't pinpoint exactly where or how many there were. Aquino could sense the presence of high-ranking demons, being always gifted at sensing magic, and she felt nothing from Satoru. Literally nothing. He didn't feel like a demon, a fallen angel, a mage, or even a human, which left Aquino with no idea what Satoru Suzuki was supposed to be. After all living things possessed magic no matter how small. But perhaps that was no surprise. In the first case, Aquino simply didn't know what she was supposed to feel, and therefore couldn't grasp Satoru's identity. The world was big, and for the hundreds of magical beings and abilities that Aquino knew about, there were 1,000 that she didn't know about. And then, above all, 10,000 of things that she didn't know about. Of course, this is all barring the possibility that Satoru had an ability that masked him even from Aquino's keen perception, unrelated to his general level of power, such as a sacred gear or magic. In the third and most unpleasant option, her inability to tell what Satoru is, was proof of his strength. That Zeoticus had been right in his assessment of an ultimate class demon-level opponent, and Aquino needed to pick up Rias and run away right now, straight to Director Johann's door. All in, hoping that she had enough strength and time to activate the emergency portal. Aquino had fought in the past, although intermittently, the destruction of the stray devils in the city fell on the shoulders of all demons who encountered one. But it was Rias who was in charge of tracking them down and destroying them throughout Koa's territory, with Aquino occasionally accompanying her. Even then, the level of enemies she had fought were only low-level demons, with anything tougher screened by the many demons the two older sibling Maos had placed in the city. In other words, Aquino was relatively inexperienced in combat, only being in a scrap several times, and so, the possibility of fighting an enemy that she had no hope in defeating had only remained in her imagination. An enemy equal to that of an ultimate-rank demon was definitely in that category of a hopeless fight. If Satoru really was that strong, that is. But the fact that the possibility exists was still something that caused her heart to beat erratically. And now they would suddenly provoke such an opponent. Aquino was dead. To be fair, most of this city was dead, including Rias and Sona. Of course, if anything happens to the two heirs, Satoru would also be dead, as the emergency forces arrived in Kuo, followed closely behind by the two Maos. But that would be cold comfort if she were already dead. So Rias, though she had hammered out permission to at least try to make contact with the mysterious Satoru, didn't feel too confident. That's why she didn't immediately lash out at him, demanding him to respect the underworld's authority over Kuo, long ago bought from the Yukai factions for the demon faction's use. Instead, preferring the most diplomatic and mild of languages, "Excuse my curiosity, but can you tell me a little about what the hell you were even doing in my city?" If a lot more politely. Well, she did say polite and not diplomatic. She had almost had a heart attack when she heard Rias speak that way. Luckily, nothing bad happened, and Satoru had acquiesced to her demands peacefully. According to Zeoticus, there was zero chance that this was all completely coincidental, and in the matter of protecting her daughter, Aquino was inclined to believe him. As were believing that having her and Rias escorting the ultimate rank level threat was more ridiculous than threatening. Why would basically handing the most probable assassination target on a platter be the way to go? Aquino understood that having Satoru where they could see him is much better than letting him wander alone. But why couldn't Sona handle it instead? Out of the corner of her eye, Aquino could see that Satoru was taking glances at the window, looking at something out of it. Aquino, unable to hold her curiosity back, followed the direction of his gaze, spotting three familiar troublemakers, currently enjoying their lunch and seemingly were loudly chatting about something. Most likely about a woman's body. The famous, perverted trio of Kuo Academy, no less an attraction of the academy than the two great ladies of Kuo, Aquino and Rias themselves, if for two entirely different reasons. As far as Rias and Aquino have managed to gather, Satoru Suzuki had introduced himself as the older brother of the perverted trio, Issei Hayadu. He had applied to the academy just this morning, together with documents in his name and a diploma from Kyoto University Academy. Fakes, of course. However, while the diploma might have been fake, was Satoru's relation to the Hyudu family also fake? The Yukai were famous for having large and long family relations, at least some of them. For the longer-lived Yukai species, they could create many families during their lifetime, so having many extended families was not impossible, especially as Kuo was formerly a Yukai territory. Of course, it was also possible that this was all a Yukai prank. That faction is famous for having some very egregious pranksters after all. And while there were not many true heavyweights among that faction that would risk pulling such a prank on the heirs of two very important pillar families, and while no one investigated the Hyudu family too hard when enrolling Issei in the academy, as far as it was known, they did not have Japanese monster blood flowing in them either. But even so, there remained the issue of family resemblance. Satoru Suzuki looked like the splitting image of a much older and mature Issei, and not at all dissimilar to the Hyudu patriarch either. Not that changing appearance is a rare skill, nor was it all that common either. But still, to be able to change one appearance to mimic familial resemblance so perfectly requires great magical power and knowledge. Never mind doing so without giving out any trace of it. One needed to be an ancient magical being who has centuries of experience in controlling their magic, lending credence to Satoru's identity as someone of the ultimate rank. But in that case, why Issei? Issei was certainly an amusing pervert, but he was ill-suited as a cover to infiltrate Kuo Academy. His reputation preceded his accomplishments, and one mention to Satoru that he was Issei's older brother could bury his reputation permanently. Something wasn't quite clicking right in Akino's mind, as if she had overlooked, or perhaps didn't possess an important piece of information, which made Akino nervous. Her nervousness then passed on to Rias, and seeing the nervous king only made her even more nervous. Only Satoru seemed perfectly calm in the current situation. Having to escort such an unknown is nerve-wracking to both Akino and Rias. Sadly, they cannot simply leave, as while watching him during lessons, they also had to do it with the help of simple human observers, since it turned out that she simply could not use magic to watch him. Nor can they simply send familiars as if through their eyes they could not find him. Rias managed to find out that all throughout the day's lessons, Satoru was perfectly calm, and in some time he just seemed bored. He hadn't even bothered to put out the textbooks, preferring to sit silently sinking into his thoughts, only sometimes reacting to the teacher's questions. What's even stranger, however, was that whenever he was called by the teacher to answer some sort of question, even once from a subject not in the textbook, he would just shrug. Oftentimes, the teacher would even just simply forget that they had asked him a question, and no one found it weird or even glanced strangely at his actions. Akino even checked Satoru's teachers and surroundings after class for mental manipulation, but could find nothing, which meant either that there was no such manipulation or that Akino couldn't detect it. The possible consequence of the latter option unnerved Akino, causing her already troubled mind to think of even more dire possibilities, which in no way helped her calm at the moment. So, with the stairs leading to the rooftop of Kuo Academy in sight, Rias started speeding up, almost leaving her queen and Satoru behind. Akino didn't blame her though. Rias could barely keep herself from some kind of nervous tic, and Akino wasn't much better off wanting for all this to be over with. Though what kind of plan is just leading the unknown danger to the rooftop to talk with him, Akino doesn't really know. It's not like the change in elevation would make the situation any less dangerous to the two of them. Actually, why couldn't they just have this talk in the headmaster's office, so that the escape route is much closer? I should have just put my foot down and told Rias that the school wasn't her responsibility right now. Akino tried to calm down, seeing as Satoru hadn't reacted to Rias' action and failed. It's Sona's responsibility by day. We should have just dumped everything on Sona. Though knowing Sona, who fancied herself more of a strategist and tactician, but not a negotiator, who panicked about involving her family in any way, she couldn't imagine what she'd do. Most likely she'll just try to sit Satoru down to play chess, which was probably even sillier than trying to negotiate on the academy rooftop during their lunch break. Anyway, walking up the steps up to the rooftop and the waiting Rias, they're already here. She just has to hope that Satoru didn't have any ill intent. And if he does, she's really hoping that the Gremory backup she's feeling was around, wasn't just a tick of her nervousness. If nothing else, the rooftop should provide a clear firing line. So now, Rias, who Akino could see was trying to regain her original confidence when she had argued with Zeoticus about the fate of Kuo Academy, took a deep breath. Another of the reasons Rias wanted to designate the location where she would confront Satoru was for this small symbolic gesture of defining the negotiating place. Though, even Rias knew that such a symbolic gesture meant little. After all, she had decided to not invite Satoru to the occult research club, the actual seat of her power, nor had she actually recalled her whole peerage. Perhaps she was feeling that leading Satoru there would have an adverse effect on the chance of open negotiations? And seeing that any other rooms would just elicit the same response, the roof was the only place suitable as neutral territory. At least the roof has chairs? Akino doesn't really know how to feel if she has to entertain the guest on the concrete ground. Ria seems to have already chosen the place where the negotiations were supposed to take place, seeing as she's already seated on one of the chairs. So Akino, trying to appear more confident than she really felt, made her way, taking a seat behind Ria's back as her role as queen dictates. Satoru, who looked as relaxed and unruffled as he was before, maintaining an unreadable expression, settled down opposite Rias, tucking his legs slightly. There was an awkward silence for a moment. Satoru was clearly putting the initiative in Rias's hands, and yet he looked so calm that Akino would not be surprised if he was now planning their destruction. At the same time managing, in a strange way, to give the initiative and yet keep the situation under his watchful control. Ahem, Ria spoke first, trying to ease her nervousness and unable to tolerate the silence anymore. It is a pleasure to welcome you to Kuo and especially to this academy. Omo, thank you. Satoru nodded slightly, showing the proper amount of official respect, but nothing more. It is as if he doesn't care at all about the fact that he was in the presence of the heiress of the Gremory family and the younger sister of Lucifer to boot. He had easily dismissed the fact that Rias had greeted him on behalf of Kuo, and thus on behalf of the ruler of this place. Not that Akino was too well versed in such diplomatic etiquette. Akino were only familiar with how Rias would act as the heiress and never really in any official capacity, or only in view of her upcoming duties as heiress to the Gremory family. But at least, judging from the interaction, that was the impression Akino got from the brief exchange of phrases. Rias waited a few seconds to see if Satoru would say anything else, but he didn't seem to care at all about this negotiation. He was really acting as if he was only satisfying Rias Gremory's curiosity, as it was said, rather than engaging in dialogue. To invert and twist Rias' own phrase in an instant, as a result of which she was now relegated from the position of negotiator to the position of asking for answers. It was a cruel and mocking but masterfully executed trick that may have caused enmity, but it also demonstrated Satoru's keen mind. I'm slowly beginning to like you. Akino smiled slightly, feeling her nervousness slowly begin to recede at the playful gesture. Ahem, in that case. Rias, still feeling uncomfortable though, especially after Satoru had reduced her negotiating position with a single phrase, easily bridging the chasm that separated the heiress of the Gremory family from that of the common man. I would like to know, what is your purpose for coming here? In Kuo Academy especially. My purpose for entering Kuo Academy? Well, that's simple. I wanted to get along better with my little brother Issei. I see it to be much simpler for me to enroll at the same school as he did. Satoru both answered and did not answer Ria's question. Akino knew he could easily lie, but if Issei really was his little brother, who knows, maybe he was telling the truth? Coming to protect his family and younger brother from the world of the paranormal was a simple, understandable, and logical motivation. Though it didn't explain who Satoru Suzuki really was or who he was to Issei, as Rias had investigated Issei when the thought of adding him to her peerage first appeared. Issei had no older brother. Which faction do you represent? Rias took the plunge, simultaneously questioning both Satoru's political affiliation and his species. Only myself. Which Satoru just as easily rebuffed. In a way it answered Rias' question by actually saying that he had come here, unaffiliated with any faction, and thus not having their support behind him. Which also, in turn, meant that he was strong enough to allow himself this autonomy. And yet, his answer also easily evaded divulging his true nature, so that Rias couldn't continue to press the subject. That is, unless she wanted to choose to stand as opposition, who was trying to ferret out his secrets. With one simple answer, he had positioned himself as a neutral figure. One that, without having a clear picture of his power, Rias couldn't take any hostile action towards. At the same time, he had also hinted that even if Rias did figure out his affiliation, he had shown that he was acting on his own volition without the support of that faction, and also without any restriction. Of course, that was simple sophistry, as any hostile action on his part would still carry an effect to his faction, no matter how independent he proclaimed to be. But Rias couldn't move to figure out that information without being the party that had broken the peace first. You're really good. Akino liked this strange, appealing way of Satoru, turning his verbal opponent's words, thoughts, and actions into his own advantage. With slight hints and just a few words, achieving results that would not have looked half as graceful had they been uttered by someone not maintaining Satoru's mask of quiet politeness. Akino had never thought until this moment that she would enjoy watching someone satisfy their own sadistic tendencies, much less through conversation. But life, as it turned out, was amazing and full of surprises. Ahem, right, what about your plans? Rias looked intently at Satoru. I mean, I'd prefer it if you weren't planning to set up your residence here. But Mickey's house is in Kuo and I live in it. I suppose you could think of it as my residence as well? Satoru tilted his head slightly to the side. Well, Mickey's residence. Akino felt her smile creep further up her cheeks against her will. It was only the guise of professionalism to prevent her from bursting out laughing, as Satoru took Rias by the nose like that and made her look like a fool. Akino considered Rias her friend and wouldn't have been happy if Satoru had become truly hostile to her. In the end, he still kept his calm politeness and clearly made it clear that he wasn't Rias' enemy. Even if his answers amounted to mockery with a slight touch of sadism and truly masterful skills as a negotiator and deft politician. He hadn't actually outright become hostile, it was simply Rias' bad luck to encounter such a cunning linguist. Akino had heard of the Yukai of Kyoto being mired in politics, but never thought she could see the results of such a brutal selection for herself. Not that Satoru had shown any Yukai characteristics. Satoru's words and actions seemed to tickle the nerves all over Akino's body a little, causing her to take another close look at the new guy. Ahem. Rias tried to clear her throat once more to mask the redness in her cheeks as she was led around in circles in the conversation. Rias, perhaps I could get you some water to drink? It seems that your throat is particularly dry. Satoru feigned politeness, though he didn't particularly change his expression from his polite and calm mask, managing at once to both hint at his desire to leave the current negotiations, seeing that lunch is coming to an end, and to mock Rias' actions and nervousness, standing on a fine line between sadism and mockery, an insult and a joke. Akino couldn't help herself and let out a light chuckle with her nose, which earned her an angry look from Rias, who had broken negotiating protocol and had tacitly dismissed Satoru. But he instead looked from Rias to Akino and back again, keeping the same expression as before, as if he had nothing to do with it. Rias, realizing that she was being mocked like a little child trying to get into a place where it was too soon for her, only took a deep breath and exhaled, asking the last and most important question, "Do we have reason to be wary of you?" "No," Satoru answered calmly before he looked at Rias carefully, his gaze touching Rias as she suddenly flinched, just as Akino flinched instantly, forgetting her mirth in the same second. If eyes were a reflection of the soul, then this man, this creature, had no soul. His eyes were empty and lifeless, staring at the world coldly. It was like an empty abyss, drawing in anyone who stared too long into it. "Unless you take the first step against me, that is, I would not be the first to break the peace," Satoru replied, keeping the same calm and polite tone and the same expression on his face, but his eyes differently, paradoxically empty and yet full of ruthlessness. "And I would be glad if you would not do so right now as a gesture of goodwill. I would like my first day of class to end peacefully." Satoru looked away, and the spell was immediately broken, allowing Akino and Rias to breathe out the air that they suddenly held as they were plunged to the deep end of the pool. "And call these people away before either of us takes the first and final step." A moment later, Satoru looked up, and Akino realized that 3 pairs of demons had appeared behind her where there was no one before. Judging by the look of them, they were ready to rush into battle at that moment as soon as anyone made a move. First and last step, just like he said. Akino froze once more, finding herself in such a precarious situation so suddenly. A stark difference from the pleasant, for her, conversation they had before. But that explains exactly why I felt the presence of strong demons nearby, other than Rias herself. Although it does not explain how Satoru could find them so easily. So he was really someone on the level of the ultimate ranks, if not stronger. Got ouch. Who the hell brought him into our school? The demons, obviously intent on battle, hesitated for a moment, before they obeyed the order and lowered their arms, stepping back to show their peacefulness. Rias could give the order, "Stand back." Satoru on the other hand only silently and slowly rose from his seat, not provoking the demons before smiling and bowing slightly again. "A pleasure doing business with you, Rias Gremory and Akino Himejima." Turning around slowly, Satoru headed away, exactly at the moment when the bell sounded to end the lunch break. The only thought in Akino's mind at that moment was something truly trivial. He remembered my name. That could have gone better, but all in all, not bad. Mamanga noted internally the results of the past negotiations. After all, he still had absolutely no idea who exactly Rias Gremory and Akino Himejima were. But judging by the fact that the demons watching them obeyed her orders and had appeared instantly, as soon as Mamanga looked into Rias' eyes, and she reacted strangely for some reason, when she recoiled, she was someone important. Maybe she was a commander of some sort? Apparently she wasn't too surprised by the appearance of the invisible people, so she was at least aware that they were there. Perhaps she had even sent them there herself to watch the proceedings, or maybe just as backup and just pretended not to notice them the whole time. Perhaps she hoped to be able to attack Mamanga if necessary, if he didn't notice the people's presence? On the other hand, these people weren't even strong enough to penetrate his passive defenses. But Rias shouldn't have known that, given the surveillance protection Mamanga used. In which case, Rias would have been planning to the best of her capabilities and knowledge and used someone strong enough, by her standards, for her possible ambush or at least emergency defense. Well, she at least has some tactical acumen on her side, as creatures from level 30th to 40 were about the same as what Mamanga himself would choose as a human shield. At least if he was prepared to retreat at the first sign of trouble, as the ratio of cost to expected effectiveness was terrible, namely 0. They were completely useless except for the very possibility of the chance of intercepting a strike aimed at Mamanga. But in that case, the plan regarding ambushing Mamanga made no sense. Against a level 100 player, especially given the inability to gather information about him, it might require either several battles for intelligence gathering, or 2 or even 3 level 100 players. 30th and 40th level creatures in this case could act solely in the role of living shields, disposable test objects, living projectiles to disarm traps, or for reconnaissance at the cost of their lives. So either someone was using Rias as bait to gain information about me, or she has extremely seriously underestimated me and my abilities, or from her point of view level 40 is strong enough to use against an unknown threat. Mamanga frowned at the potential implications coming from this information. On the other hand, this is a new world after all, and I'm judging using only simple basic information gathering spells from the past, and I've already come across one really strong being of this world, the Great Red Dragon. Staying vigilant in this case is still a priority. Mamanga ended that line of thought with a nod, as he sat silently in the classroom as the teacher droned on about one subject or another, as Mamanga didn't really know what they were talking about. If nothing else, that meeting with Rias had allowed me to pass lunch without suspicion. Getting back to my other thoughts. I don't know Rias' identity yet, but she at least has some weight in the local balance of power. Mamanga nodded to himself, not paying attention as the teacher, who, seeing his action, cheered up a bit as he continued his lesson. And judging from the outcome of our conversation, as long as I go about my business quietly, or at least without implicitly being against her interests, she will not attack me. It can't be called peace because she will definitely try to gather information about me to find out my weaknesses. Then again, I'm actually already doing that by using Pandora's actor as a proxy. Which means that this peace is precarious, but for the moment we've both outlined red lines that no one should cross. After another look up at the board, and seeing nothing that he could understand, Mamanga returned to something that is actually fruitful, planning his next move. Unknowingly, Mamanga's action, shaking his head, caused the teacher to panic and check his writing on the board to fix the mistake that the newly transferred genius had noticed. Rias apparently doesn't want me to stay in this town for long. Understandable, no one wants an unknown near their base, but I managed to convince her that I would just stay within the confines of Mickey's residence. Come to think of it, I wouldn't mind walking around town and maybe doing a bit of shopping. I'd be happy to get out into nature, something that I couldn't have done before. Indeed, the opportunity to enjoy nature, I don't think even the rich could afford it in my past world, excluding perhaps the artificial gardens of the arcologies. But here, I need nothing more than to get on a car drive. Mamanga remembered exactly how he'd gotten to the academy this morning before frowning, causing the teacher who'd caught his expression to falter slightly. No, get me off the wheel, how about a train ride instead? Or even by bus? But that would obviously require money, and there's no way I can start earning money willy-nilly, especially since it's against the academy's rule. As it turned out, the high school of this world was something full-time and disallowed any part-time work. And although he still hadn't received his tuition bill yet, probably because he would get it at the end of the month. Finding an earning opportunity at the moment was already difficult, and now he has to work around the academy's rules as well? Maybe I can use doppelgangers? Mamanga thought for a moment. Send them to work in this world after summoning them, to find them proper identities though. Finding identification for himself was already causing him so many issues, To find them for the doppelgangers too would be close to impossible. After all, if this world were anything like his past world, strange amounts of wealth gained would be scrutinized heavily by the authorities, especially for taxing purposes. Maybe he should just make them mined for mineral resources to sell? Processing raw ores into ingots should be profitable enough. But then again, where would I find a seller that wouldn't ask too many questions? Another errand head shake, and the teacher had to scramble once again. How could he have missed such a simple mistake? Maybe if I could easily find some high-paying job in this world that I would be good for, maybe killing monsters? But apparently the monsters of this world were hidden from ordinary people, which makes it unlikely that I could easily find such a job. I could ask Rias, but apparently she didn't really want to do business with me in general, preferring that we both not interact too much. Not to mention that she would obviously start gathering information about my abilities. Even if I hid it, some would definitely leak out. This, of course, assuming that she would actually have a job killing creatures that she would be willing to offer me and pay for. Perhaps I shouldn't have done what I did in the end? While necessary, it did sour our relationship a bit, making it awkward if I were to ask a favor now. Unfortunately, Momonga's own create body spell, though it created a perfectly natural body, was somewhat limited in functions. While it was capable of simulating the body's sensations and physiological responses within certain limits, it could not fully reflect its emotions. More specifically, it followed a strange system, mirroring the actions of Momonga's normal undead body, and his undead body could not display his emotions, except for rare exceptions like blinking or opening his mouth. In this case, it led to the fact that without additional assistance, his new body could only display a small range of emotions, mostly through the eyes, with almost no involvement of his facial expressions themselves. But Momonga could compensate for this disadvantage by manually maintaining his facial expressions. Just as a person could smile just by moving their lips, it just wouldn't show in his eyes. In his opinion, a wide smile with dead eyes just looks creepy as hell, so he preferred not to show any expression. At least it worked really well as a poker face, not showing Momonga's inner panic at all. After the previous night, during which Momonga had worked out several appropriate facial expressions, he had settled on what he considered a standard, polite and calm expression, and just kept that same expression all the time. However, during the conversation with Rias, Momonga was struck by great nervousness, as if he were sitting in an interview in his former world. And so, while Rias only asked him questions, making him only answer and answer, Momonga himself was unsure whether he could ask a question in response. So when his nervousness hit its ceiling at the end of the meeting, Momonga, after his passive skill got rid of his emotions, decided to do something so that Rias and Aquino would not take advantage of his weakness. He had issued them a warning, determined to show that he could be serious too. And to do so, he stopped faking his facial expression in his current body for a moment, instead returning that to a completely impenetrable mask before looking seriously at Rias with more than a clear hint of a threat. And it ended up causing the men who had been standing silently around Momonga all this time to rush forward, defending their charge, almost making Momonga react violently. Luckily, Rias called her subordinates back before it could have turned into a full-fledged battle. Still, his attempt to impress Rias was rather unsuccessful, and all Momonga himself could do was turn around and quickly walk away, pretending as if it was all part of his plans. And so, from that moment on, Momonga sat silently in the classroom, watching the lessons gradually go by in front of him. If he had less control of his actions, Momonga would have loved to begin scratching his head in annoyance. That was such a failure. Well, there's no use in crying over spilled milk, he'll just have to move forward without expecting any cooperation from Rias' part. Still, the idea of enrolling in a school itself wasn't that bad in Momonga's mind. He barely remembered what his elementary school was like, only remembering that he generally liked learning, and from a rational point of view, the idea of going to school to get smarter and better at running Nazarik wasn't bad. Of course, seeing that what the teacher was speaking and writing were basically Greek to him, and he could probably learn the language much easier now, he needs a lot of studying to catch up to the curriculum. Besides, by staying in school he could actually look closer at the human world, escape from Nazarik, and gather more information. In general, there were a bunch of reasons why in the end, Momonga's plan was not bad. At the same time, however, Momonga suddenly realized that the school in this world did not provide specific information, concentrating instead on general information. Perhaps Momonga should have remembered this earlier, but the last time he visited a school in his former world was decades ago, and he hasn't even thought about formal education since. Especially since mentions of a school were usually when he came across vacancies of various levels, like high school diploma required. Considering that certain jobs required a certain level of education, It would be logical to assume that at the school he could get that very knowledge he needed. At least that's what he thought would happen. Mamanga doesn't really know what the teacher's teaching, but he doesn't think he's teaching on how to operate certain heavy machinery, or the complex machination of things that his previous world's high-level jobs required. Perhaps it is something that requires special permissions? It's strange how the classes he's been in have been a shotgun blast of all possible subjects. Why would he even need to learn the reason a specific author chose a red door in his writings instead of blue? Mamanga could somewhat understand the necessity of learning geography and language. Gathering information is basic warfare 101 after all. But why advanced algebra and literature? In addition, Mamanga had seriously underestimated the time and energy he needed to spend on school. The realization that he needed to study for a full year, day after day, 5 days a week, for half the day came to Mamanga only when he suddenly realized that he had spent 7.5 hours on school today, of which only an hour and a half was spent on all kinds of breaks, which meant he had studied for the full 6 hours. And that's only for 1 year. To think that a normal education was supposed to take 12 years. Of course, that was only half of his regular work shift, and after each work shift he found time to play Yggdrasil, which meant it wasn't such an obstacle. But to think that every year, 8 hours total would be spent on only one thing. This is the most useless and frustrating grind I've ever had to think about. Mamanga shook his head, forcing the teacher to look away, then, in a slightly shaky voice, continued reading a paragraph from the textbook. Every year for 12 years, 8 hours a day with only weekend breaks, Why do I have to do this? I don't even like this quest, and I wasn't promised any significant reward at the end. And I'm even used to the uselessly long grind in Yggdrasil. The grind in Yggdrasil was divided into 2 types. One that players liked and one that was rewarded by the developers. If a player enjoyed dealing with hordes of low-level enemies, turning entire armies into nothing with a single spell, then they didn't really need a reason in the form of a reward to go to the same location and kill the same enemies over and over again. And the one the players didn't like doing? The developers could promise or even hint at some reward, or players could accidentally find out about some rare drop and go grind the same boss, even if they didn't like the grind itself. In Mamanga's situation, however, he didn't like the grind, and he didn't like the fact that he wasn't entitled to any significant reward for it in the end. At least not one that he could see. Apparently, as was proven in his easy admission, barring the surprise of the supernatural presence accusing some hiccups, he could forge documents pretty well with his magic. If he were to use real crafters and maybe by carefully studying the documents of this world, he could get rid of the need to get documents legally. Besides, I can't even go to work properly if I'm completely tied to the school from morning till night. And with Pandora's actor gathering information even in my absence, there's no reason to stay. Especially since I've already fully exposed myself to the local faction, while Pandora's actor, thanks to my bad luck, was able to slip under their noses easily. Why do I need to stay? I could just stay in Nazarik. Okay, maybe sitting indefinitely in Nazarik with nothing to do isn't any better either. Besides, with Albedo there. Albedo, there's another headache that I would prefer to never have to address. Mamanga shook his head, and the teacher, who seemed to be somewhere between life and death by this point, finally gave his soul to God and could only murmur something about studying a textbook on their own. Okay, even so, I should stick around for a couple more days, maybe I'll even change my mind about staying in school? And Mickey, I'm sorry for how things turned out, that I accidentally destroyed your life for something I didn't even like in the end. Mickey, I apologize very much. A moment later the bell rang, snapping Mamanga out of his musings, whereupon he shifted his gaze to his watch, then to his teacher, whose face was changing between all the colors of the rainbow, attracting Mamanga's attention. Which just seems to make their pallor worse for some reason. Maybe he's sick? If so, I hope he has the money to pay for treatment. I'm sorry, teacher, but I have nothing. Shrugging internally at his teacher's strange condition, Mamanga blinked as he realized that his arcane sight had determined that he actually had magical powers. After which Mamanga shrugged. Rias has clearly already made the first move against me. Mamanga turned away, eager to exit the class and school entirely. So getting out of here soon might not be a bad idea, but along with all my previous actions. I'm starting to get a headache. I'm going to have such a bad headache in the morning. Mickey paused her libations for a moment, looking at herself in the frosted black reflection of the television, before she scoffed and put her hands back on the bottle of wine, swallowing a big sip. That hits the spot. When she got back to her empty home after dropping off Satoru, Mickey found that she didn't know how to live her life anymore. Everything seemed pointless and useless, the world seemed ruined, and where yesterday the idyllic garden of beautiful family life had bloomed, now was only slowly fading ashes. Probably if it were not for a completely random chain of coincidences, Mickey would have still been asleep, having exhausted all her strength in repeating the same thoughts in her head 1,000 times in a row the day before. However, Mickey had gotten out of bed, and had faced the earnest Satoru as he had cooked breakfast. Ah, what a silly thing to do. Mickey took another large gulp of wine before she tried to rise from her seat on the couch, and found that she's unable to put her legs under her. She leaned to the side and almost flew into the refrigerator, before she froze and wrinkled her face. She had seldom drank alcohol. She might have allowed herself a little sip of wine for the holidays in the past few years. But other than that, she had never had a passion for alcohol in any form. She had tried it, of course, and once or twice in her distant youth had drunk to the point where she could definitely be called drunk, but even so her level of familiarity with alcohol was extremely close to zero. Ha, that's right, with alcohol you need to have some snacks along. Mickey paused, after which, putting down the wine bottle that luckily hadn't spilled even with her rough handling, she opened the refrigerator, peering into it to find her snacks. Ha, wine is supposed to. What is it supposed to be accompanied by? Cheese and chocolate? Haha, there's neither. Mickey's gaze came across the neatly packed dishes that Satoru had prepared this morning, and she hummed sadly to herself. Okay, the food Satoru cooked looks and tastes like the most expensive restaurant food I have ever tasted in my life. Maybe not cheese or chocolate, but it will absolutely do as an appetizer. Maybe I should have drunk sake instead of wine to make it go together better. Pulling out a container from the fridge that contained something from her morning breakfast, Mickey made her way back to her seat, grabbing the bottle and closing the fridge before settling down in front of the TV again. In the morning, finding herself with Satoru as he showed her concern, Mickey felt better. Much better than she had expected. Much better than she thought was possible, given her morning. The trip a little later had been unusual, the mildest word Mickey could use in this case, but it hadn't been bad in the end. No, in a way it was even interesting. If Mickey needed something to distract herself, a car ride at a couple of 100 kilometers an hour on a road jammed with morning cars rushing to work by the inhabitants of Kuo was exactly what Mickey needed. Then in the principal's office, Mickey found out that in addition to his previous incredible qualities, Satoru is also a genius in about all areas of human knowledge. After that, Mickey said her goodbyes to him, sending him to school and as she slowly walked home, Mickey suddenly realized that with each step she walked, moving away from Satoru, the thoughts that seemed to have receded completely from his mere presence began to return again. With each step that she walked, each moment that she moved away from Satoru, from Kuo Academy, Mickey felt her past thoughts begin to press more and more into place. About Goru, about her marriage, about Issei, her son. The son for whom she had sacrificed her health, her strength, her entire inheritance on the best doctors and medicine. And to move in with Goru, she had given up all her friends and dreams. How stupid she had been. Mickey barely put the cold container of food down before taking another large sip of the wine. Ah no, of course not Issei, her son, it wasn't his fault. Goru, it was by following him that Mickey had almost cut all her ties to the past world, giving up her once seemingly wonderful career prospect because he had promised to take care of her. For her to become a housewife, halting her career, she had even stopped talking to all her past friends. Why hadn't she seen red flags before? Goru always pretended to care about her, but if only Mickey hadn't been so blind. If only she had seen what he actually is. Mickey, honey? Goru's voice sounded pitiful and squeaky in Mickey's head, reflecting her inner state and the copious amount of alcohol she had drunk. With your health, you shouldn't be working. I'll take care of the two of us, but in the meantime you lock yourself in the house, don't talk to anyone, cook, clean, do the laundry and wash. It's a lot easier than shifting papers at work. Oh, I know about how much you wanted to go into the teaching career, but then you'd start socializing with other people. What if you're just like me and started chasing after the nearest man? No, stay home, Mickey, you're tied up inside your cell now where you have to clean up every day and make sure the bars don't rust. Just perfect. Mickey took another swig of her bottle of wine before reaching for the food container and opening it. Issei wasn't to blame, not at all, for what had happened, but he was so much like his father. Looking at him, Mickey would remember Goru, and anger and pain started to boil inside her. It was not Issei's fault, absolutely not his fault. Mickey could say it over and over again, but making herself not only say it, but also hear it, was much harder. Mickey hadn't met Issei in the morning, and when she met him again at school, he only reminded Mickey how much he had taken after his father. She wanted to cry for how low she had fallen, judging her own son for his father's action. At the same time, she could only cry after realizing that even knowing the wrongness of her feelings, there was nothing she could do about them. It seemed that, at this time, only Satoru remained her ray of hope in this strange and unsteady world, which overnight had ceased to make any sense. Miki put the eel sashimi in her mouth and then leaned back on the couch. As soon as she thought about Satoru, her thoughts, which seemed to be full of unsolvable questions, wavered and retreated a step. When Miki was with Satoru, when he showed her his caring or poised adulthood, when he helped her, or even when he drove, seemingly oblivious to the surrounding dangers, Miki felt protected. Did it make any sense at all? Or was it all a consequence of yesterday's betrayal? Did her psyche, now wounded, damaged and scarred forever by what had happened, with her sanity was already beginning to slip through her fingers, her thoughts began to muddle through? The effect and the cause had switched places, and tomorrow she would wake up in a small room with soft white walls? Miki raised the bottle of wine again, and then, after greedy gulps of the last drops, she didn't even set it down, instead letting the now empty bottle fall from her hands to the floor and roll away. To hell with cleaning, to hell with her responsibilities. There were no more responsibilities. There was no family, no home, no husband, just her. She was alone, an aging housewife who had lost everything in an instant. She didn't even have a job. The last time she had had a job 6 months ago was as a librarian for a couple of months, because she was tired of sitting at home. She had worked 3 or 4 hours a day, 2 or 3 days a week, and only for 2 months. Did she even remember what it was like to wake up every day for work, to go to that? Did she remember what work even was? Her world had fallen apart. Goro hadn't even shown up on her doorstep after yesterday to try to even apologize or explain himself. She'd even gotten a call from his work, so apparently Goro hadn't shown up there either. And rightly so, let him run away with his tail between his legs, the bastard. Haha, 20 years of marriage turned to nothing in a dozen minutes on one fateful evening. And in the sea of her shaky life, there was only one lighthouse, seemingly immovable even in this storm, a lighthouse called Satoru. Only Satoru had kept her from falling into a meaningless existence that morning, lying in her bed and crying from her own weakness. Only he could throw off her silly thoughts. And when Miki found herself cut off from him, the thoughts returned again. With each step, with each passing moment, the memories began to appear, crumbling Miki's mind. She did not have the strength to return home on her own. Her strength had run out a couple of streets before her house. All the pathetic remnants of her strength were only enough to go to the nearest store and to so many bottles of wine that she could carry. So, all Miki did when she got home was drink alcohol, pausing between panicked sobs and hysterical laughter, trying to drown out her thoughts for the last 24 hours? After all, it hasn't even been 24 hours since Satoru took his first step over the threshold of this house. It wasn't so long ago that her life had turned upside down, and yet it felt so long. As her thoughts seemingly slowly break through the lid of her skull, digging into her brain and turning it, along with all her thoughts and memories, along with her entire worldview into a meaningless liquid mush. She could only drink more to dampen the pain, as her head mixed together the seemingly supposed to be always separate thoughts. Husband and lover, son and scorned Satoru, and Miki just wanted things to be simple again. Her seemingly unsinkable Titanic of quiet family life turned out to be a cardboard boat in a small stream. It sank not even because it ran into a rock, but simply because its cardboard got wet and it was time for it to fall apart. The world ceased to have any meaning, and everything that Miki thought was sacred, thought inviolable, became nothing. Miki just wanted it all to end. For someone wise and knowledgeable and full of understanding coming along and telling her how to live her life. What was the sacred meaning of her 20 years of marriage to Goro? How she should feel about Issei now? How she should live her life now? What was her damn meaning in life? Miki had once asked herself this question, and had once come up with the answer. Her raison d'etre was to be Goro's wife and Issei's mother, a model housewife and later a grandmother. And as it turned out, she didn't know a damn thing. She couldn't even guess a single letter of her reason for living. Her seemingly appropriate answer couldn't even fit into the puzzle given to her. And now, as if she were just as trapped as if, when doing a crossword puzzle, she easily gave an answer, barely hearing the question. Giving an answer consisting of 5 letters, only to discover that that answer had to consist of 20 letters, 3 numbers and 2 apostrophes. Nothing made sense, everything made no sense, and she was a boat stuck in a storm. The latter, however, was due not only to the metaphysical storm in her life, but also to the fact that Miki had already drunk enough to not only be considered merely drunk. She was rapidly approaching the state of being half dead, if only judging by her blood alcohol content. Miki stood up, whereupon she reached for another bottle of wine with an unsure step and in a couple of awkward movements pulled the cork with a corkscrew before taking another sip. Goro was out of her life, she didn't want to see Issei, and Miki had never believed in God. Miki genuinely wanted someone kind, wise and strong to appear and solve all her problems. Miki took another helping of the exquisite sashimi. Where did Satoru even find such a fresh fish? As she felt instantly a little better, along with her thoughts rearranging itself. Satoru? At the thought of the newcomer, the person responsible for revealing Goro's trickery, Miki could only smile sadly, feeling her soul grow a little warmer. If only you could help me. How fascinating. Issei, Pandora's actor, gently treaded the strings of Miki Hayadu's soul and thoughts, watching with bated breath as slowly as if in the throes of birth, her soul was reforged. In place of the spark of purpose that had burned out in the past, a new one rose, quite young and small, but quickly rising before his own eyes, gradually flaring up more and more. Father, I thank you 100,000 times for every movement that you make in this world, that I can make in this world, and I am so grateful to you that I can see the bestimming in her soul. Issei obeyed his father's commands, primarily what he said directly. He had studied the occupants of Kuo Academy carefully for the past day. Classes were surprisingly easy for him. He could always use his teacher's knowledge as an answer to any question, even if he didn't know the answer himself when it came to history or literature, but most of the time he didn't even have to answer correctly. No, he needed only to answer as Issei had always answered. Skimming over the thoughts and memories of his surroundings, quite uniform in their perception of Issei, it showed that he was only required to answer what people expected to hear as his answers. Sometimes guessing, sometimes blundering, and sometimes showing unexpected strange wit in non-obvious places, forcing his irrational and unusual answers, where there seemed to be no logical connection between the question and the answer. In the sense that these answers pointed not to logical systematic weaknesses or strengths in Issei's education, but were merely a random sampling of possible choices, each of which was quite randomly defined as suitable and unsuitable for Issei. All based on such fuzzy concepts such as, I think Issei knows this and I think Issei couldn't answer that. Pandora's actor acted to seem as ordinary as possible in the perception of all the people around Issei. And since Issei wasn't even supposed to pay attention to the progress of the lessons and the questions and assignments from the teachers, he devoted himself entirely to the study of his surroundings. Mostly, of course, it was all meaningless. All around him were empty, stupid people with empty, stupid meaninglessness in their souls and heads. Miserable souls, so miserable that they were not even capable of understanding what exactly they were deprived of. Just as a blind man couldn't comprehend what it meant to see, so the people of this world were doomed to exist unable to fully comprehend what they had never had in the first place. And yet among the tasteless dust and irritating emptiness there were exceptions, oh so appealing exceptions. Kibayudo, as for example. His hatred and purpose, all pointing in the same direction, were so exhilarating to watch, all the while he put on a facade of calm. A little further along is Akino Himejima, a magnificent and unique figure. Similar to Kibayudo and yet so different from him. Where Kiba should have been a holy swordsman, a road tragically cut off, Akino was born as a half-fallen angel, and could not get rid of that stigma. Where Kiba was full of hatred for the world around him, Akino was full of disgust for herself. And where Kiba was torn between two inner fires, Akino created a clamp of her own, trying to strangle herself, each time approaching and recoiling from that boundary, walking in circles, unable to leave her own self. Kiba was a loyal knight, Akino was a loyal queen, and they both pursued their goals. Kiba's goal contradicted his loyalty, the destruction of all holy swords, while Akino's goal coincided with her fidelity. To destroy forever the very notion of Akino Himejima, the fallen angel. A wonderful, unique being, a magnificent exhibit, looking at which Issei could pull out a new mask, a new emotion and a new reaction time after time. He now understood why his father liked to collect not the prints of personalities, but their wholeness enclosed in the overall shell of a living being. Turning what would only be paintings in his gallery into living artists, continuing to paint new and new masterpieces, even when the artists themselves became exhibits. And even more, Issei felt his mind tickle with a pile of thoughts of each new discovery prepared for him by Father. For in his mercy he not only bestowed the greatest reward at the end, but also rewarded Issei at every step of the way as he followed according to his will. All the more incredible was to see how the seemingly certain truth of the world about the invariability of the blindness of those born outside the mercy of the 41 crumbled under his gaze. Father wove his actions into a single thread, moment by moment, creating a vision for one who was deprived of it, as if in the stories of men making the blind see, a miracle. But of course, on a level that was beyond the imagination of any creature but the inhabitants of the great tomb, surprising even their imagination and consciousness. Father also was outlining for Issei a new path, a new stage of his play, rising to a crescendo step by step, allowing him, Issei Pandora's actor, to play first fiddle in his great play. For this was a test for Issei as much as it was his reward, it was a punishment as much as a blessing. For such was the will of the greatest supreme being that determined the very meaning of these words and concepts, just as the lesser beings determined only one of them for each of their decisions. Now Issei saw what his father was doing, and what role Miki played in his great infinite play. Why she had ascended the stage, and how she would be exalted by his will, and how she would be brought down if it were his whim. In other words, Issei saw both his role and his path. Father. Issei smiled, exultant. Inwardly, of course, he would not fail to play his part. Your faithful son will play the part assigned to him as you have decided then, and will turn the audience into actors and the actors into stars. For thou hast already taken the actress from her two-person little street box and raised her to the great stage before the eyes of the world. And all that remains to me is to act in your will and grant her those lines that she will have to utter, to see if she is worthy to be the one standing on that stage, or to be rejected as talentless. Father, please look at me as I enact your will. Issei could not restrain himself, responding with a high military salute before reporting back to his father, all-seeing eye. Fata mituns. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub, share and donate for more videos.